The Green Bay Packers reportedly made a push for Jonathan Taylor. Now, that doesn't really make sense for this version, or really any version of the Green Bay Packers, but that doesn't mean a potential superstar trade doesn't make any sense. Plus, Brian Gutekunst insists this team was not trying to get younger, just more athletic. And to that end, we go through the guys who made it onto the practice squad at the end of today's show.
You are Locked On Packers, your daily Green Bay Packers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Packers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Peter Bukowski, and I cover the Packers for The Leap, a newsletter I would love for you to subscribe to. Follow me on Twitter, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on Twitter, Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to the podcast, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you find podcasts, you will find Locked On Packers, the number one Packers podcast on the internet, and the show for fans who know what happened. They want to know why and how. Thanks to everyone who makes Locked On Packers their first listen every day. We hope you like starting your day with us as much as we like starting our day with you. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 back in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. So this whole Jonathan Taylor saga started at Wisconsin, but there was a disgruntled star running back in Indianapolis. Miami was in on a potential trade. There was rumors of other teams, never substantiated. I don't want to get into rumors. But then Stephen Holder from ESPN reported the Packers had, quote, legitimate interest in trading for Jonathan Taylor. Now, Ryan Wood subsequently came out and said he spoke to a source with the team that said, it was really more like a scout, had a conversation, and that was it. And that's how this can often work. You have personnel people who are constantly making calls, gauging interest, seeing who's available, what it might cost. You've seen this in those really cool behind the scenes at the draft kind of videos where it's like someone is saying, hey, Brian, not the Packers, because the Packers would never allow anyone to do this, but it is a personnel person who's on the phone with another team saying, hey, we think it's this for this price to move to this spot. And the GM says, oh, okay, well, what about this? And then they have that whole haggling conversation. It's not what the Aaron Rodgers situation was, where you have Brian Gutekunst and Joe Douglas and the brain trust all in a room negotiating. It's not that in most of these cases. Now, I don't care about the Jonathan Taylor of it all. Like, I understand why you would at least have a conversation about it. A.J. Dillon probably not going to be on the team in a year. Aaron Jones getting up there in age, already very expensive. If you're going to pay money on a running back, why not go a little bit younger, a little bit more explosive? Had some injury issues. We understand all of that, but the Packers' offensive line, much better than Indianapolis' offensive line. And when you have a young quarterback, a good running game is a really nice thing to have. I get that part of it. But to give up assets and then pay him at the top of the market on this team at running back, that's the part that doesn't make any sense. But we talked about this a little bit yesterday at the end. This idea of a superstar trade. And I wrote about it today for The Leap, a newsletter I would love for you to subscribe to. And the more I thought about it, the more it seems clear to me. A superstar trade makes a lot of sense for the Green Bay Packers this year or this offseason if things go a certain kind of way. Now, this is all predicated on the Packers being good or being, solid. If they go 9-8, 10-7 this year, you can talk especially if Jordan Love looks good, you can talk yourself into a world where if you add one more piece, it can take you to that NFC contender status, especially in a very weak NFC. And who knows what the future of the quarterback position is in San Francisco? Who knows what's going on there? Who knows what the future is with Mike McCarthy and Dak Prescott in Dallas? And there's a lot of older players on that Eagles team, guys who are going to age out of that high level of play. They've already been hit with some roster attrition, already been hit with that coordinator attrition. Who is that up and coming team? Well, maybe Detroit. But put the Packers roster player for player against the Lions roster player for player. I think I'd rather have Green Bay's roster, frankly. So it's not just Buda Baker, who was the name that we threw out there yesterday. I started to get a little devious, get my thinking cap on here. Von Miller is going to miss the first 4 weeks, at least, of the Bills season. It is a meat grinder of a division in a bloodbath of an AFC. Sean McDermott is not that far removed from saying he was very concerned that Stephon Diggs was not participating in camp. What if that goes sideways? And you have a chance to get Stephon Diggs for a first-round pick. And you already have this other pick in your back pocket. We've framed this other pick that the Packers are getting from the Jets as potential ammunition if the Jordan Love thing goes off the rails. And I'm glad so many of you loved my Kirk Cousins idea so much the other day. But that extra first-round pick has often been framed as potential ammunition to move up for Drake May or Caleb Williams. Now, you're not moving up for Caleb Williams. Like, let's just forget that. It's not happening. Whoever gets that topic is drafting Caleb Williams. Drake May, we can have a discussion about that. Maybe someone is willing to do the RG3 deal, for example, to move up and do that. But what if that extra ammunition actually becomes the key piece in a trade that allows you to add a little bit more veteran player to this young team? Now, Stephon Diggs is not old by any means. He's still certainly in his physical prime. He is still an absolutely incredible number one caliber receiver. This is not like DeAndre Hopkins this offseason. This is much more like Devontae Adams or Tyreek Hill last offseason. Not this past, but the one before that. It's much closer to that. I don't think Diggs is quite in the Devontae Adams realm, the Tyreek Hill field tilter realm, but he is like right there with those guys. And I don't think the Raiders, I've heard this idea that, they're going to trade Devontae Adams to New York this year. Number one, why? And number two, who's running that team? You have a GM and a coach on the hot seat. They have to win. They have to win. And guess what? They have New England Patriots DNA, which means they're not helping the Jets. Give me a break. A Devontae Adams return? Perhaps maybe he'd be open to it. He sees Jordan Love balling out. Jordan Love lights them up in Las Vegas, and Devontae goes, hey, man, I'd love to come back. Come get me. Just an idea. Just a thought. There's a roadmap here for the Packers to get a star if they want to. And what I find interesting about all of this is just the fact that there was a conversation in Green Bay, I think speaks to the team going, we're going to be good. Forget this outside noise. We're going to be good. We don't care what you think. And even if we're not good week 1, week 4, week 6, by week 10, week 12, week 14, we're going to be good. And that means if a trade doesn't happen this year, it could happen in the offseason. That really sets you up. The Packers have what could be a momentous, if this team is solid, if they're 9-8, even if they're 8-9, but really competitive, and then, or 9-8, or, of course, 10-7, you're cooking. But if they're in that range with all of these young pieces, you go into next offseason going, well, with the draft capital and the money that they can move around and create for themselves, they could really be in the mix. They could be 1 player, 2 players, 1.5 players away from NFC contention. That's not crazy to be talking about in a very diluted NFC with all of the young talent on this team. And so I'm not going to be surprised. Like the Jonathan Taylor of it all, that was a little surprising. But I'm not going to be surprised if Brian Gutekunst tries to take a big swing here if this season starts to go the way that they think it can go. All right, we're going to talk about speed. Dirty, nasty speed. Coming up in just a second here on Locked On Packers. Get ready for the NFL season with an incredible offer from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Plus, all customers who bet that $5 will get $100 off NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. I already have it. I can't wait. I've already heard from some people in our subtext group who have been using it and they love it. There's all sorts of functionalities they're playing with. It's a great opportunity to try it out. And now is also the best time to join FanDuel. The app is easy to use and you can bet on everything from spreads to player props and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the season with an offer you won't want to miss. Plus, the Packers are still so undervalued. Go bet on all the Jordan Love overs. Go bet on all the Packers over. The Packers to make the playoffs. They're still plus odds to make the playoffs. Go win some money. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. And thanks to everyone who makes Locked On Packers their first listen every day. Everydayers. Later this week on the show, Ollie Connolly from the Read Optional wrote this terrific piece about Jordan Love. I'm not going to spoil any of it right now or in this episode, but it is going to be coming to you tomorrow on our show, and I cannot wait for you to listen. So Brian Gutekunst addressed the media yesterday, downplayed all the Jonathan Taylor stuff because of course he did. But he had a quote that stood out to me. And it wasn't intentional to be young. It was intentional to be athletic and fast. And now, when we talk about the idea of Packer fans being really excited about where this team can go, one of the reasons is because it is flush with athletes. Because this is the fastest this offense has been ever. Like legitimately, maybe the fastest this offense has literally ever been. But that wasn't the case last year. In fact, one of the reasons why this offense took off is precisely because Christian Watson became the focal point. And without Christian Watson, when he was hurt, this team was impossibly slow. And look, like Mercedes Lewis provides an incredible benefit for your team. And Al Nazard does so much for your roster. So much in the run game, so much in the passing game. And so this is a situation where you're moving on from Al Nazard. Big catch, sideline receiver, but not someone who's going to stretch the field really. You're moving on from Randall Cobb. Speed was never really his game. He could win vertically in the middle of the field because it's him versus grass. But even his quickness has waned. He's an older player. And by the way, he's going to be starting for the Jets. They tried to tell me he was like wide receiver 5. No, he's going to be wide receiver 3 and maybe more on third down. We'll see. You move on from Big Bob Tonyan, who has just not looked the same ever since that ACL injury. Just doesn't have the same kind of juice. And Adrian Amos clearly lost a step last year. Did you bring in better players than some of those guys? We have no idea. In the case of Adrian Amos, certainly not better than what he was in his prime. But Adrian Amos was not in his prime last year. Can they be better than what Adrian Amos was last year? I think you could get that level of play from a Rudy Ford or a Jonathan Owens or an Anthony Johnson Jr., all of whom are much better athletes at this point in their career than what we saw from Adrian Amos on the field last year. Maybe he was hiding an injury we don't know about. That all seems reasonable. But it was Speed. Speed that they added. Luke Musgrave, low 4.6 guy. Tucker Kraft, 9+ relative athletic score. You bring in Jaden Reed, 4.3s. Elevate Romeo Dobbin, Christian Watson, both guys who run 4.4s or better. Dontavian Ricks and Grant Dubose, not elite level athletes, but have the sort of athletic profile the Packers tend to like, which we know, historically speaking, says they will hit at a higher rate in those circumstances. We talked about that yesterday on the show. Now, it helps that they also could save some money by not re-signing some of those players, by not bringing them back. But you replace Dean Lowry with Kobe Wooden, with Carl Brooks. Now, Carl Brooks, not an athletic upgrade from Dean Lowry, but Wooden is. Devontae Wyatt taking his snaps absolutely is an athletic upgrade. Yes, these guys are young, but they're fast. They're explosive. They're dynamic. And do I think he's telling the whole truth on this one? I don't. Probably not. Is the reality? Probably not. But that's okay. Because what he's saying is true, that they did get more athletic. They did get faster at those positions. And I think it is, in a lot of ways, a huge benefit that they did get younger because of that developmental curve, because of the upside that those players bring. So it's not just, oh, we got younger. No, the team got not just more athletic, but they added to the top end of what this roster can be by season's end, by the middle of the season. And that's a really important thing. You know what Big Bob Tunyon is, a really reliable guy who is never going to stretch the middle of the field the way that someone like Luke Musgrave has already shown he can stretch the middle of the field. Jaden Reed, for whatever he is going to lack in week 1 of this season, he is going to threaten the deep middle. He is going to threaten on crossing routes in a way that Randall Cobb just can't. More reps for Christian Watson and Romeo Dobbs and Malik Heath means more opportunities to create explosive plays that Allen Lazard, at least with his speed, was not able to do. Chemistry, all that stuff. Yep, I get it. But Jordan Love is not throwing those sorts of transition go balls to Allen Lazard. It's just not part of the deal here. Can Devontae Wyatt? Yeah, Devontae Wyatt probably going to be better than Dean Lowry like right away. That's okay. So this is part of the case for the Packers just being better is they have more upside. They have more top end because of the athleticism, and they're replacing players that just, like, frankly, weren't very good last year. With the exception of Allen Lazard, who was a solid, very quality ancillary piece, tertiary, secondary. Let's not demean his contributions as one of Allen Lazard's biggest supporters and fans. Love Allen Lazard. I've been championing him on this show for years. Since the pre-draft process, I was an Allen Lazard guy. So I understand where Brian Gutekunst is coming from. And by the way, I agree. All right, we're going to recap what is going on with the roster right now, where it stands, because there's been a couple of transactions you might have missed, who landed on the practice squad, all that good stuff. We're going to talk about it in just a second here on Locked On Packers. Thanks to everyone who makes Locked On Packers their first listen every day. Everydayers, go check out what we're doing over at theleap.football, a newsletter I would love for you to subscribe to. Go subscribe to Subtext. Maybe you don't want newsletters. Maybe you want direct access to me. We can text. We can chat. I'm going to send exclusive content to our Subtext list. Go subscribe over on Subtext. Find Locked On Packers. Click subscribe, and you will be off and running. You'll get a text from me right away. I absolutely promise you'll get a text from me right away. I will text back. I will text back. And go check out Locked On Sports today. It's all the biggest stories in sports in under 20 minutes wherever you get podcasts. The practice squad, as I was looking at it, I was like, oh, wait, this is interesting. So 2 players that I was a little surprised to see on the final 24 or final 53, final 24. Sheesh. The final 53. Tariq Carpenter and Jonathan Ford. They're on the practice squad now. And one of the reasons is because the Packers ended up placing 2 waiver claims. And that means that they had to figure out what was going on with the rest of their roster. And so they do that. They release Tariq Carpenter and Jonathan Ford. They end up in the practice squad along with Austin Allen. And that is what we were speculating would be happening, because Austin Allen, because of these new rules with the practice squad, you can just call a guy up. It doesn't have to be on your roster if you have a depth problem on a given day. Tucker Kraft wakes up, tweaked hamstring. You don't have enough players. You have a situation where you can just say, okay, I got him. And you can move up Austin Allen. I think the same is going to be true with Corey Ballantyne, who also comes back on the roster, and Patrick Taylor, frankly, who's also back. They did bring back Grant Dubose, which I'm very glad to see. Bo Melton, I'm very glad to see. Some interesting players, though, that I don't know that we were necessarily expecting. Benny Sapp had a really nice preseason. He ends up on the roster. The practice squad. Keyshawn Banks, a player I really like and I wrote about at The Leap when we were doing our big series on players, outside linebacker. He made the practice squad. Alex Magoo, he's on the practice squad. Henry Pearson, the fullback. Again, another piece where if you need a big body that day, you can bring him up. Keandre Thomas, the corner. They have 2 corners here, plus Innis Gaines, who can play nickel and play safety. And so that's a pretty good situation for them to be in. Now, what about the claims that they made? The players that they added, you have to go through waivers. You can't just give someone up, but waivers. So it's Zane Anderson from the Bills, who were actually signed to a 2-year deal this last year. The Packers get that contract, I believe. And Ben Sims from the Vikings. Ben Sims, a tight end, 8.4 RAS. He was someone who had a pre-draft visit with the Packers. And interesting, I've seen him described as a run-blocking tight end, but I went back and I read some scouting reports. He was not someone I had watched, but he was someone who got a lot of heat late in the process for being someone who could make some plays with the ball in his hands, who could run good routes, who could get open. I was reading Dane Brugler's scouting report, for example, on him. More a get-in-the-way blocker. He's a willing blocker. He's just not a very good blocker, or at least wasn't. And showed some progress in the preseason with the Vikings. I watched a little bit of it because I was like, oh, this is interesting. And so when you have someone like that, you add him. Now it makes it a little less important to have someone like Austin Allen, but it's still depth. Sims is the perfect kind of player that they were looking for. Remember, I was talking a couple weeks ago, everydayers will remember, about this idea of a trade for a tight end. Can you trade a backup offensive lineman? Can you trade Yosh Nijman? Can you trade Royce Newman for a tight end? A young tight end? Well, perfect opportunity. Here, you don't have to give up anything. Waiver claim. He's a rookie. You have no idea. I don't think it says that much that he didn't make the Vikings. They had a couple, 2 players at the top of their depth chart that you knew were going to be a part of the deal there. I'm not going to pretend like I followed all the machinations of Vikings training camp, but like I said, I don't think we can take too much away from him not making the Vikings. He's a player that I'm very intrigued to see. I'm not going to be surprised. I mean, that offense, a ton of similarities in terms of verbiage and all the stuff that they're going to, concepts, he's going to be asked to be a part of in Green Bay. He'll walk right in and know what's happening with the offense. That's not going to be a problem. And that's a really good thing to have with a player like that, a young player. You're not having to overload him with a bunch of new stuff, new techniques, new ideas, none of that. He can just come in and hit the ground running, and he's on the same trajectory, the same learning curve as the rest of your guys. He is not a threat to anybody. He's not, some old veteran who you have to give snaps to. No, he's a young player who can grow and develop. He's young, yes, but he's athletic and he's fast. 4.6s. He's a good athlete. He's a really good athlete, in fact. So that is one of those that when I saw it, I was pretty excited about that for the Packers. I think that makes a lot of sense. Now, is he going to come in and beat Jimmy Graham? Like, no, probably not. Probably not. But this is a really good outcome for the Packers practice squad. They brought back some of the key guys that they wanted to bring back, the Dubose, Banks, Jonathan Ford, Tariq Carpenter, those guys. And then that smooths out some of the things. Like, I didn't have Tariq Carpenter or Jonathan Ford on my final 53. I feel a little bit better about that now because it turns out they didn't really, like, they made the final 53, but they didn't really. As soon as the Packers could find some better players, they were like, these guys, out of here. Out of here. So it's just the practice squad. I try not to get too worked up in who's making it and who's not. Basically, everyone we thought was going to wind up on the practice squad or that could credibly make a case to be on the team that didn't make the team wound up on the practice squad. And that's really, at this stage, all you can ask for until, the regular season, when you start having to, maybe you can find a Russell Douglas. Probably not, but the Packers did it. Maybe you can find a Devondre Campbell. Well, probably not, but the Packers did it. So it's also true that you just never know. You just never know. You cannot assume the competency of other organizations to correctly identify and or develop talent. You cannot assume that. I love when I hear people on Twitter or on TV or on the radio or on a podcast be like, well, the team knows better than we do. Maybe. But we have 100 years of evidence. Teams make mistakes on this stuff all the time. So we cannot, if you're one NFL team, you cannot assume the competence of another NFL team, and definitely do not assume the competence of a college coach. Especially that. Because they do not care about development. They care about recruiting, and that's about it. Recruit. Get your guy to the NFL and recruit some more NFL players and stay employed and keep getting those fatty college football checks. That's what they're doing. Talk to anyone who does a professional development in the NFL, these personal coaches, and they will tell you college coaches do not give a what about developing their guys. They don't. They care about putting them in the NFL and then recruiting the next 5-star who they can put in the NFL. That's what they care about. All right, back tomorrow. Ollie Connolly from the Read Optional on the program to talk about his excellent piece on Jordan Love with some terrific anecdotes, some sourcing, some reporting about the impressions that Jordan Love has been leaving on the Packers, their decision to move on, all that good stuff. There's a ton of great stuff in that piece. Go find it, and we'll talk to Ollie on the show tomorrow. Follow me on Twitter, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on Twitter, Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to the podcast, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you find podcasts. You will find Locked On Packers. And anytime you want to come hang out with us live like we will be after week 1, baby, you can come do that on our Locked On Packers YouTube page so you can stay Locked On Packers.